Hey guys, it's me, Mr. 250, and welcome back to Higurashi. I think this is the last one I'll do, for now. And we just had Hanyu introduced to the cast of characters, at least in terms of the actual, game. And hopefully, I'm kind of, we've gone over a lot of this game recently. So I'm kind of hoping that we'll get a little bit of an abbreviated session here rather than literally playing through the entire events all the way up to the Watanagashi Festival and then everything like that. But we'll see, I feel like we've gone through most of a game already. I don't want to necessarily have an entire game added on to what we've already done. But we'll see. Anyway, hotel employee says this is the banquet section. Can you hear me?
スピーチあと一人で乾杯に入ります。準備できてるね。
広報 OK です。内部全然聞こえないんで、スピーチが終わるタイミングでコールをお願いします。
We already... Yeah, we did play through this. This is the beginning, the very beginning of the game this played through. Right.
いいかい。各宅にビールは10本ずつだよ。
It's like, why does this seem familiar? Because it is.
ちゃんと自分の縄張りにスムーズに運んでね。
Young waiters with bow ties got bottles of beer ready for a toast. There are several dozen tables with white tablecloths in them in the banquet room. Approximately 8 people are sitting at each table, so there are at least a few hundred people there. The banquet room is teeming with excitement. There are many plates with different kinds of food on each table. A sushi platter, a sashimi platter, a fruit platter. Also along the wall there are cooks ready to serve fresh sashimi. All the guests appear to be well-mannered gentlemen and obviously are notable people from different fields. The huge and beautiful chandelier above them clearly tells that this hotel holds a status good enough for those famous people. An elderly gentleman is giving a long speech on the stage before making a toast. Usually people don't like such long speeches, especially if it's before a toast. But the guests are actually excited with his speech. Well, maybe fervor was a pleasant way to put it. It was probably more accurate to say their excitement was bizarre. I wonder how much of this they're going to make us play through. Considering we already saw this, and it's not in chronological order to what we've already done. This happened years ago at this point, right? Anyway, Japan accepted a demand for unconditional surrender, and the day they did, the Pacific War ended. In other words, even if they had to take care of further business, the war ended that day according to international law, and from that day on, there was peace. Therefore, if any troops invaded Japanese land during that peace, that would be an encroachment against Japan. No matter what the Soviet Union says, the Northern Territories are Japanese land, and it should be clear to everyone that they invaded illegally. Hear, hear! And now they want to settle by returning a mere 2 islands to us? Who do they think they're kidding? Listen, Habomai, Shikotan, Kunashir, and Iturup are Japanese territory. Their total area is equal to an entire prefecture. What would you think if the Soviets invaded and occupied one of our prefectures? Would you set up for just getting half of the prefecture back? No, you wouldn't. You'd have the entirety returned to you. Yet the Soviets are brazenly sitting there claiming vested rights to the land. This is no joke. We must strongly oppose this to the bitter end. Return all the northern islands. Our nation must demonstrate unwavering resolve on that point. Thunderous applause filled the banquet room. All the gentlemen agreed and expressed that they felt the same way by cheering him on. In all that hubbub, there were 2 people standing by the wall who didn't seem to fit in with the rest. They were wearing sharp-looking suits and a little too old to be called young men. Were certainly young compared to all the elderly gentlemen in the banquet room.
どうして政治家ってこう説教臭いというか若者軽視というかこう偏るんでしょうね。
簡単なことさ。政治家が一番欲しいのは票だ。票は有権者が投じる。だが20歳以上が全員投票するわけじゃない。投票率のほとんどは 退職して時間にゆとりがあり、その分政治に関心の高い高齢者が占めている。
となれば高齢者層をいかに取り込むかというのが選挙のポイントになるわけですね。
The war only happened 40 years ago. In other words, the generation that's interested in voting is the generation from before the war.
うちのおふくろよく空襲の話をします。昔は水道橋のあたりに住んでて、空襲で家族を全員失って焼け野原を一人さまよったなんて話をいつも。
そうさ。
My parents went through the war. They shed their blood, sweat, and tears, believing it was for the good of the nation. They lost the war, but they believe the war still brought about change that serves as a foundation for the peace we have today. I hear that a lot. That if Japan hadn't fought in the war, the Asian countries would still be Western colonies. There was no way we... It's kind of distracting. Stop talking, I'm trying to talk. Anyway, there's no way we could have won, but we needed to fight in that war, something like that. In that case, no matter how much they preach pacifism, politicians can't ignore the pre-war generation. War is bad, and we should never again fight a war. But that war was necessary. Unless they say things like that, it's like they're denying the very lives that generation lived.
なるほど。政治家も票を取るのに大変なんですね。
そういう主義主張も本心でしているなら一意見の主張として立派だと思う。だが彼らの票が欲しくて表向きだけ調子を合わせてる卑劣な政治家もいる。そういう迎合的な政治家が後を絶たない限り解雇主義は永遠に終わらないのさ。
そうして若者とお年寄りの意識の格差は多分1000年経っても相変わらず。
Let's just keep repeating that the war was justified, yet regrettable every time an election takes place. When will our country ever be freed from that cycle?
簡単さ。若者がちゃんと選挙に行け。そして安易な迎合にごまかされずちゃんと政策を考えてるやつに投票しろ。実現可能な政策だぞ。
ああ、いますね。明らかに実現不可能な公約を掲げてる候補者っています。あ、赤塚さん、F 択ってあれじゃないですか。
あのご婦人だな。行くぞ。
The speech had ended, and the elderly gentlemen were giving the man on the stage a standing ovation. The two men walked through the crowd and approached an old lady in a kimono.
はい、私ですけれども。
昨日お電話で約束させていただきましたものです。赤坂と申します。
So I guess it was a little different. You know, Akasaka was definitely not there last time. Or at least, not in any way that I knew about.
主人はね、ずっと日本のためにと身を粉にして働いてきたんですのよ。それなのに
奥さんの胸中深くお察しします。
This wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. Nobody could remember if there had been a donation or not. So a handful of politicians were questioned. As a result, some came up with a scheme to blame a sickly elderly man who had already retired, with only a short time to live anyway. He was the perfect fit for them. The elderly man had already been sick in bed, and the shock of his friends betraying him had taken away his will to live. The only thing his wife could do was simply watch him suffer. She kept crying while telling the men about her husband's achievements.
ご主人の無実が間違いなければ必ずや裁判官は正義の判決を下すでしょう。大丈夫です。濡れ衣は必ず晴らせます。
そんなのは分かっています。だって無実なんですから。でもね、 判決が出るまで主人は持たないんです。お国のためにとあれだけ働いてきて、あれじゃあ死んでも死にきれません。
Akasaka nodded and tried to find the right words to say to her. His colleague rummaged through a pile of paperwork behind him. The papers were filed with fine print, or filled, and it would be hard for an onlooker to tell exactly what they were. However, the way he was looking at them made it very clear that they contained something very important.
赤坂さん、こいつはすごい資料です。金の動きが完全に網羅されてます。
Akasaka gave him a signal to remind him that this wasn't the place to be looking through those documents.
奥さん、この他には書類束のようなものはありませんね。
ええ、主人の金庫に入っていた文書はそれで全てです。どうかそれで恩知らずな連中に一泡吹かせてやってください。あれだけ主人に世話になっておきながら。
奥さん、この文章の内容には一部ご主人にとって不利益な内容も含まれていますが。
ええ、それは分かっています。政治はね、きれい事だけじゃないんです。私だって政治家の妻ですのよ。
ご協力を感謝します。この書類は必ず巨大な不正を暴くために使用します。
一つだけよろしいですか。それを公表するのは主人が亡くなるまで待ってもらえませんか。
The paperwork Akasaka received was something her husband intended to take to the grave with him. Something like that shouldn't exist in this world. If it went public, her husband's name would be disgraced. Akasaka nodded.
わかりました。誓ってお約束します。
Vast public funds were moving from Kasumi Gaseki. The funds were issued to sub-branches to carry out national policies. But various ideas over those public funds always came together, and there was never an end to those trying to poke a straw into it to suck it out like a mosquito. Excess dividends, cordial patronage, cordial? Yeah. Profits for organizations that benefited themselves. Many financiers approached and adhered to officials and politicians hoping to earn those gains. And the bureaucrats constantly indulged them. That's how Japanese corruption works. These illegal pipes form bypass after bypass in Kasumi Gaseki, siphoning off public funds for their profit. I don't know why I had trouble with that. To find and destroy such pipes is, of course, in the national interest. But eliminating illegal expenditures isn't as simple as all that. There are important people connected to those pipes, and when those people are investigated, a major political scandal takes place. The reason why the government doesn't investigate such illegal expenditures is not only to protect vested interests, but also because they are conscious of the damage these scandals can cause politically. To put it more succinctly, the government can't endure the pain of pushing pus out of a wound. The closer the exposed subject is to the top, the greater the pain faced by the government, and that affects the cabinet approval rating. The closer the subject is to the core, the more extensive the damage to the heart. The secret investigation Akasaka was leading went as close to the heart as it got, and could cause a collapse of the administration from shock. Akasaka was tipped off that a huge amount of public funding was leaking out through an alumni organization of the Seven Imperial Universities, so he and his colleagues had been conducting a secret investigation into the matter for a long time. His target was tightly knit, but he learned the wife of one of the organization's senior members bore strong resentment towards them, after her husband was made their scapegoat and he managed to contact her. And because of that, he had gotten his hands on an extremely important information.
Minnaご苦労さん。だいぶ外堀が埋まってきたようだね。特に赤坂くんが入手した資料は相当ショッキングなものだよ。ずいぶん苦労したでしょう。お疲れさん。
いえ。
Accidentally hit the scroll wheel. The small meeting room was filled with boxes that were in turn filled with documents. A whiteboard was filled with cramped wiring too. Okay, I don't think I really skipped much. A few of the investigators in the meeting room, which was also filled with smoke, were reading the documents intensely. Their intimidating manner clearly indicated that they were police officers with a great deal of experience. Akasaka was one of those men. It had been a while since Mamoru Akasaka was transferred to this apartment. When he worked on the case of the kidnapping of Minister Inukai's grandson, he'd been a rookie, but by now he was an experienced investigator. After a knock on the door, an elderly man entered the room. Everyone straightened up all at once.
室長、お疲れ様です。お疲れさん。立たなくていい。楽にしてくれ。諸君に今日は素晴らしいプレゼントを持ってきたぞ。カノ、お前を息子の授業参観に行かせてやる。
The meeting room was filled with sighs tinged with exasperation and resignation. It certainly wasn't because any of them hated to go to Parents' Day.
やっぱりな。そろそろ頃合いだと思ってたんですよ。くそ。
Akasaka's colleague complained. They had been so close to getting to the root of this issue. They had such strong evidence. Akasaka, on his part, wasn't too disturbed. This had happened several times in the past, and considering how hot the documents he obtained were, it was easy enough to predict. The case was suddenly transferred to another department. That meant their investigation ended here. The new department was supposed to continue the investigation to exposed injustices, but that's never happened once before. It was just an excuse. The investigation had been terminated because of pressure from above, I should say.
くそったね。俺たちが今日まで捜査してきたのは何のためだったんでしょうかね。
海を出す痛みがどの程度か測るためだろうな。その結果、痛みに耐えられない規模だということが分かり、荒領事を断念したってことだろう。
In that sense, their hard work wasn't wasted. Because of it, the investigation was terminated. Akasaka understood that, but his colleague wasn't yet mature enough to understand. Of course, Akasaka's sense of justice was displeased by this. He felt frustrated with his superiors, who had hesitated to expose the truth. But he was mature enough to know not to say that out loud.
資料の整理と引き継ぎについては今後向こうと調整していく。とりあえずみんな長く休んでないだろう。5時を待たなくていいぞ。引き上げて体を休めてくれ。残務整理は明日話し合い、あと振り替え休暇の消化をしよう。ちゃんと消化して神さん孝行しろよ。主査は俺と来てくれ。以上だ。
Yes, sir. Though his long secret investigation left a bad taste in his mouth with its resolution, he managed to earn a holiday until the next incident arrived.
じゃあ、室長のお言葉に甘えますかね。みんな、今日は早く帰って休みな。
こういう時、早帰りすると不倫の現場に出くわしたりしちゃうんですよね。
バカだな。お前知らないだろ。赤坂さんとこは熱愛夫婦だぞ。毎晩別当の公衆電話からラブコールかけてるの知らないのかよ。
赤坂んところはいいよな。うちの女房なんてそりゃそっけないん
I
だよ。
hate my wife. Akasaka smiled bitterly as he gathered the documents in his hands. One of the pages fell to the floor. It was a page from a huge pile of papers documenting illegal expenditures. They exposed the illegal expenditures of the Alphabet Project, the research team for the next generation of hardware, and the Defense Agency. It was entirely possible that this project was created in the first place for the purpose of funneling these illegal expenditures. When he saw the paper, one thing caught Akasaka's eye. He picked it up, looked at it, and tried to remember. It was a list of people who illegally received public funds. It was also a list of retirees who were still very much in love with money. There should have been no connection between those people and Akasaka. However, there was one thing that caught his attention.
入江診療所
As soon as he said it, all sorts of memories resurfaced. Yes, the Irie Clinic. When he was working on the case of Minister Inukai's grandson's abduction, he got into a scuffle with the suspects and became injured. He was taken to the local clinic. As he recalled, the name of that clinic was the Irie Clinic. He started to remember one thing after another. His very first experience with wading into the muck. It was burnt into his mind like a fresh memory, and he could vividly recall everything that happened. His daughter was about to be born, and he really didn't want to go to Hinamizawa. He met Oishi, who taught him a lot of important things. He also met a girl in that village. Her name was, yes, Rika Furude. That was it. How long it had been. How old was she now? As he remembered her lovely smile, he also remembered the ominous prediction she made. She had predicted that if she didn't go back to Tokyo, something terrible would happen. At the time, he took it as nonsense, but he felt something odd about it, as if it was a divine omen. Then he had remembered Yuki, who was about to give birth. He became concerned that something terrible would happen to her. But he couldn't just leave and go back to Tokyo. That's why he called her right away. He told her something would happen. He told her to be very careful until he returned. Yuki had laughed and told him that he was being paranoid. But that phone call indeed saved her from a calamity. Akasaka had found out about that when he had visited her after returning to Tokyo. A few days after his phone call, a janitor was seriously injured when he stepped on a loose tile on the stairs on his way to the rooftop. He also heard afterwards that Yuki had a habit of going up to the roof for a walk every day. But because of his phone call, she had stopped doing it. If he hadn't called her, she would have been the one to step on the loose tile. In other words, Rika Furude's prediction had been correct. There was no proof, but Akasaka still believed that she was able to save Yuki only because of Rika Furude's prediction. He intended to call and thank her for saving Yuki, but the busy days that followed put it out of his mind. Rika-chan. He wondered if she was still doing well, if she was still smiling. Akasaka remembered the sad prediction she made on that night, under the moon, while still wearing that smile. That's right. She said something. She predicted someone would get killed on the night of the festival every year, and that on the 5th year in, she'd be the one to get killed. That's right, he thought. She did say that. The 5th year? That's this year! The festival is... That's right, it's in June. If he remembered correctly, it happens on the last Sunday of the month. Akasaka looked at the calendar. It was June 1983. Although there was still some time, the death she predicted for herself was coming up. The girl who predicted Yuki's accident also prophesied a mysterious incident would occur annually for the next 5 years. If they'd actually been happening, then it would happen again this year. Akasaka wondered if Oishi was still at the Okinamiya Police Department. If the annual incident she predicted actually was taking place, he would know. In other words, he could confirm if Rika Furude was going to be killed or not, with a phone call to Oishi. The girl who predicted her own death had muttered that she didn't want to die. Muttered? No. It was clearly a plea for help. A young girl who was trapped in the fathomless, bizarre traditions of a village she couldn't escape had sought help from him, an outsider. She paid his reward in advance, in the form of foreseeing Yuki's accident. He had to get to her. He had to go save her. A flood of emotions filled him up. He felt as though he had finally remembered something he was never supposed to forget. That's right. He had to go to Hinamizawa. He had to save the girl who asked him for help.
はい、沖宮署でございます。
すみません。そちらの刑事課に現在も大石クラウド氏は在籍されておりますでしょうか。もしもいらっしゃったならお願いしたいのですが。
失礼ですが、どちら様でしょうか。
警視庁の赤坂とお伝えください。
Oishi was a very lively person, but he had been old even back then. Maybe he had already transferred somewhere else, or maybe he'd since retired. But if he was still there, he'd be happy to hear from Akasaka. He sure had a unique laugh.
おいさん、外線からお電話です。東京の警視庁からですよ。
東京？そりゃまた遠くからはるばるどちら様ですかね。はい、もしもし。
もしもし。
大石です。こりゃ懐かしい。どうです、お元気にしてましたか。な。
There's that laugh. Feels like we're going to be getting somewhere now. The first miracles. Any tips? No tips. Gonna keep that tradition going. Alright, well this one is a little shorter, half an hour. I didn't really know how long this stuff was going to start being, so that's fine. I don't really want to continue on any further though, you know. And get myself potentially into another hour-long thing, so we'll stop here. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching. I'm glad. I was really worried when we got into that banquet hall. I was like, oh no. Oh, these lines are all the same. Are they going to make me read all of them? Or like, what, you know, anyway. But it looks like not. That's all pretty different. Well, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Higurashi. Bye!